Good morning. I'm delighted to kick off the day. Thank you all for your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion at Johns Hopkins, and a special thank you to the members and leaders of the DLC. There's no understating the resounding impact that this council has had to catalyze meaningful and measurable change across our university. This week's conference is proof positive of that fact. I was also reminded of that commitment last month when we unveiled Scott Tower, formerly known as Charles Commons Residence Hall near the Homewood campus. Aided by the work of our Diverse Names and Narratives project, this building now honors Frederick Scott, who in 1950 became the first Black student to earn a bachelor's degree from Johns Hopkins. As you can imagine, Fred struggled with the pressures and challenges of being the sole Black student on campus. He felt a tremendous responsibility to succeed and to find acceptance. Once, when he was feeling particularly downcast, his friend and mentor at the time, a Black sexton at Levering Hall, which was then a YMCA, gave him some truly sage advice. He said, "Don't feel like they're doing you such a big favor. You're doing them a big favor as they're doing you." He was absolutely right. Fred would later say that his greatest contribution to Hopkins was the whole person he brought each and every day to Homewood. Today, more than 70 years later, this simple and profound truth has been reaffirmed thousands of times over by our faculty, our staff, and students who are more and more representative of our nation and our world. We know that when people of diverse backgrounds and identities are able to bring their fullest and most authentic selves to Hopkins, our entire community and our institution is better for it. Everything we do to make our community more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive is in service of that promise. This includes, of course, our second roadmap on diversity and inclusion, which you'll hear about more in a moment. And I'm already thrilled by the remarkable progress that we've made on this front, as on so many others. This fall, for instance, we were excited to welcome to Hopkins our inaugural cohort of Vivian Thomas Scholars, part of an ambitious $150 million grant from Mike Bloomberg to fully fund PhD students in STEM from historically underrepresented groups. We're also reimagining what it means to be a best-in-class employer, expanding tuition benefits, and simplifying career architecture to support advancement. And we're continuing to examine critically our own history and to ensure that the public art and buildings on our campus, like Scott Tower, reflect the breadth of contributions to our academic community. We know that we have more work to do, but I'm pleased that we have maintained a steady momentum and a continued commitment to the transparency and accountability that are absolutely essential, nay, indispensable to this work. And of course, none of this would be possible without the tireless advocacy and counsel of groups like the DLC, who time and time again have been instrumental in leading Hopkins towards sustained, lasting change and holding us to account when we faltered. Thank you all for bringing your fullest selves to this work and to Hopkins, and in the spirit of this conference, for inspiring so many across our community to do the same. Now, with that, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Katrina Caldwell, Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer. As many of you know, Dr. Caldwell's expertise has been instrumental in moving our work forward, and her leadership of a truly expansive and inclusive process led us to launch and now implement our second JHU roadmap. We're immeasurably grateful to her that she's here, she's at Hopkins, she's throwing her lot in with us. And I'm just delighted that she is here today to share a few updates on the state of Hopkins' diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I couldn't imagine a more wonderful leader in this position. So thank you, Katrina. To all of you, thanks for being here today and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, President Daniels, for that gracious introduction and for helping set the context for the second day of this impactful conference. It is indeed important that we understand our institution's history as we strive to become an even more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace and community. I know from firsthand experience that those of you in the audience who participated in day one of this event walked away with new knowledges, skills, and resources that will enhance your ability to do the important work that you do. And today's sessions will be no different. I cannot overstate how impressed I have been by the intellectual breadth and depth of the presentations each year. This conference is crucial in building the capacity for us to move the needle on our DEI efforts more broadly. The more equipped our faculty, staff, and students and alumni are to address the issues that hinder our progress, the easier it will be to make sustainable progress. The more that we connect with our community members about the importance of Hopkins and share partnership, mutually beneficial partnerships, the more that we will be able to change the nature of not only our local context, but the world in which we live. I would again like to thank the conference co-chairs, Stacy Marks, Lenise Stevenson, and Kim Moten for their vision and leadership of these 2 days. And I would also like to thank the ODI staff who supported this effort, Aaron Fox and Demery Woolway. For today's address, I have been asked to provide an update on our state of diversity, equity, and inclusion at Hopkins. Many of you know I arrived 2 years ago, and a couple of days after I arrived, the conversation about the roadmap quickly began. It was an opportunity for me to get to know many of you and to understand what was important to you about Hopkins and diversity, equity, and inclusion. There were so many features of the first roadmap that attracted me to Hopkins. For instance, the fact that you have on your website faculty composition reports, staff composition reports, and graduate student composition reports. That is a key hallmark of the transparency that the institution has asked for as a part of this work. It's an important mark because many institutions don't make this type of transparent commitment to making sure that not only those of you who are at Hopkins, but anyone who wants to come onto the Hopkins website can see exactly the progress, and in some cases, lack of progress that we've made on important fronts. Talking about Hopkins as a premier research institution is important for us to set the stage for where we are and to vision where we can be, not only after the 5 years of the upcoming or the second roadmap, but into the future. Thinking about this future, it's important for us to talk about the institution as it relates to not only the context of our local world, but also the context of the global world in which Hopkins operates. As a premier research institution, not only is Hopkins impacted by this local context that I spoke about, but the global world, which was the feature of many of the talks over the last couple of days in the news, this idea that there is a world around Hopkins, that Hopkins operates in, that Hopkins has the ability and the responsibility to impact and to reflect. Events that happen globally, like war, human rights violations, state-sponsored violence, individual acts of violence, health disparities, new generational waves of poverty, remind us of the urgency of our work here at Hopkins. We are working hard to develop a DE&I framework that will be able to both lean in and respond to the world around us, and to strategically address the local needs of our internal and external communities. Building DE&I at Hopkins has been a pleasure over the last 2 years. And the reason why primarily is because when I arrived, there was already infrastructure in place of individuals who were committed to doing this work in a very meaningful, thoughtful, strategic, and tactful way. And a few of those groups are represented on this slide. So as we started to think about the DE&I ecosystem in terms of who we influence, where should there be stronger connections? How can we more intentionally showcase effort and the impact of the groups who are responsible for moving the needle on DE&I forward at Hopkins? When can we build opportunities for network and information sharing beyond the DLC conference, which is an important place? But how can we build more of that infrastructure or those opportunities? And then can we create shared strategic goals where we can leverage our local and central place at Hopkins to move the needle forward more effectively? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that I inherited when I arrived. It's an office that many of you know was started in 2016. There was an inaugural vice provost for diversity and inclusion in that role. And then that person left the institution, and there was a 2-year gap until my arrival in 2020. During that time, there was still a great deal of work that was accomplished with the first roadmap. And so when I arrived, there was a great deal that we still needed to do. And the second roadmap was a part of that. So as you can see, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion is starting to think about what the future will look like. And some of the communities of practice that we are thinking about for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion are featured on this slide. Thinking about faculty diversity and how we influence Hopkins as a place that faculty from diverse faculty see as a destination site for them. How do we attract talent? How do we support that talent when that talent decides to come to Hopkins? And how do we develop community to make sure that the individuals who come to Hopkins can be successful? The same is true with our graduate student diversity and our inclusive excellence education, development, and teaching. So we work with the BTSI program, which is a hallmark program for creating pathways and pipelines to graduate education. We are developing training development infrastructure, education and professional development infrastructure, so that we can create frameworks that we can build on the work that's done at the DLC conference, increasing the education and cultural competence capacity of our campus constituents. So we want to build out frameworks, we want to build out programs, we want to build out the supports that we believe will help move not only the roadmap forward, but DEI in general forward at Hopkins. This next slide talks about the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, which has been a key feature on this campus for over 20 years in some form or fashion. There has been support for diverse students and primarily our Homewood Student Affairs area. Over the last year, we've built out the infrastructure for the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. We've moved that center into the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to provide it with a framework to work institutionally to help us think through how better to support student success across our institution. As you can see, there are communities of practice within the Center for Diversity, the Office of Multicultural Affairs, which most folks on campus are very familiar with, religious and spiritual life, which is an important component of developing our students' spiritual and religious development, and thinking about things like when we come together as a community around crisis, or when we come together as a community around loss. So our chaplain is in that community, leads that community of practice. And then thirdly, our gender and sexuality resource community of practice. So thinking about how we support students, staff, and faculty who support those students on our campus. The other aspect of our D&I ecosystem is the group of individuals that I have the pleasure of connecting with on a very regular basis. I arrived in many of the faces that you see on this slide were already at Hopkins, which definitely made my transition a lot smoother than it would have been without this group of individuals. And so I'll start firstly with Dr. Sharita Golden, that many of you know is the Chief Diversity Officer for the health system. She and I share responsibility of the School of Medicine, but we are partners in this work. We support each other, and we align our resources so that we can make sure that we're covering the entire enterprise and that we're in lockstep with one another when there are challenges that are coming, so that we have shared messaging, so we have shared strategic approaches so that our interventions are in alignment, so that it feels like there is a very natural and connected approach across the entire enterprise for D&I. And then I was asked at a meeting just recently of a faculty member who said, how do I get connected? I conduct research that I think would have a positive impact on the work that you all do on this campus to move the roadmap initiatives forward, but just in general, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I pointed that individual to their diversity associate dean. The idea that Hopkins has committed to providing this level of support for D&I is remarkable. Not many of our peers or other institutions that are our size have this type of support at the academic division level. So I'm just leaving this slide up here for a little while because I want you to be able to jot down the name of the person who is chiefly responsible for moving DE&I forward in your academic divisions. Each of them have their own diversity, strategic, or tactical plans, and each of them are amassing resources and supports to make sure that they address the local needs that you have in your academic division. Some of them have teams of folks who help around particular key areas, and some of them, unfortunately, are single offices of one person who's working really diligently to make sure that they address all of the needs in that department, in that unit, sorry. So thinking about how you might connect with these individuals, paying attention to the information that they are either putting on the website or sending out to the community. More importantly, just giving them a call or an email and asking, how can you help to move the needle forward in your academic division? We spent a lot of time this morning praising the DLC, and I want to continue that praise. Having an organization with this many individuals who volunteer, right, to serve in this capacity is a key feature of what I saw when I arrived at Hopkins, what attracted me to Hopkins. The fact that you have 23 term members, and these are folks who raise their hand and say, I want to be a part and commit to this effort. And then 34 ex officio members who have some official role on campus. And they've said, I want to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion is a part of the work that I do, and I can inform the DEI mission. So having an organization like this that has been around for over 20 years now, and to have an organization that leads in this way, that has made significant changes, that has impacted the way that we understand diversity, equity, inclusion at Hopkins. I mean, they have been a part of key decisions on partner benefits, key decisions on whether or not we would have mandatory managerial training. They've impacted our composition, the fact that staff are now included in our composition review and assessment. Those members of the DLC work tirelessly to make sure that the president is advised on issues that are important to the entirety of Hopkins around D&I. The next group are the D&I practitioners group. So I've talked a little bit about the deans and directors group, and we meet together and we talk about issues. We come together monthly. We share best practices. We talk about issues and concerns that individuals may have. We try to troubleshoot and support each other so that we can move the needle forward. And we have on the right-hand side of the D&I practitioners group, we've brought in some departments, and Kennedy Krieger Institute is a great partner, who we think are crucial to continuing the work that we do. They're great partners. We meet often, like I said, once a month, and we talk about issues that we're all facing in our individual and in our collective environment, so our central environment. We also bring members of the D&I practitioners groups, those deans and directors, members of their team also join this conversation. So we are able to have thoughtful and meaty strategic planning conversations and share resources, as I said before. It's important that we also celebrate our success. We put in a lot of effort, and I'll talk about the roadmap in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about these are things that were already in place before 2020. And that when I go and I meet with AAU peers, other chief diversity officers in this space, and I talk about what Hopkins was able to do with the level of infrastructure that you all had. The fact that we were able to move, with new infrastructure, we ought to be able to make significant changes moving forward and making Hopkins an even more diverse, equitable, and inclusive space. We were recognized this year for the second year for that effort. We received a HEED award, my Insights in Diversity. And in fact, not only did we receive the HEED award, but we were placed in a small group of campuses that were recognized as diversity champions. Now, this means that Hopkins has had a great deal of success, but it does not mean that our work is over, right? It just means that we created a platform that allows us to make the strategic and tactical changes that we need to make. We know from looking at our composition reports that we still have places on our campus that are not diverse enough. We have places on our campus where we have no underrepresented or diverse faculty, staff, or students. We know that there are places on our campus where we need to streamline the work that we do in community. We know that in terms of our staff supports, we need to be more transparent about the ways that we support our staff, and we provide equitable access and opportunities for our staff. We know that with our faculty, we want to spend more time on education, leadership development, and building community and assets for our faculty. And we know that the competence, cultural competence, training, and development that is necessary for us to make sure that we all know what types of behaviors that we need to demonstrate to show that this is an inclusive culture. We know that that infrastructure can be strengthened. So when we talk about the next step, right, as we take our lap around the track and celebrate the work that we do, because this work is difficult, and yet we need to celebrate. We still have work to do. And the second roadmap on diversity, equity, inclusion sets us up for that work. Just a reminder for many of you, the roadmap is a multi-year institutional promise to this campus. We make commitments in the roadmap, not only in the investment of resources, but we make commitments of goals of where this institution will be in 5 years. It's an expression of our values. It's proactive, it is data-driven, and it's a strategic approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. So all of our strategies and interventions are tested. And we know that the work that we are planning to do can be effective within the context, since we now have we're developing that infrastructure to do so. It's an aspirational vision that it addresses institution commitments and risk, right? So we know that if we don't get certain aspects of this DE&I mission right, that Hopkins will not be poised in certain ways to move forward strategically in its effort to do what I said, to be an inclusive, welcoming, and diverse community. And finally, it is everyone's responsibility, right? That's an important feature. We have used integrated design thinking into the process of developing out the goals and our interventions and the implementation and execution planning. I always come to this slide is a very important slide to me, because when I'm asked after the roadmap, then what? Right? What is the point of the roadmap? And these 6 boxes, these 6 themes are what I want us to focus on when we think about the success of the roadmap. When the roadmap is done in 5 years, I want us to look back and look at these 6 categories, and we should be demonstratively different in these particular categories. So people, building a pipeline. Our pipelines should be stronger, right? There should be more clear where our pipelines are or pathways of individuals to Hopkins. There are pathways in terms of, or our pipeline in terms of how folks can gain access to Hopkins. And that is supported by the pathways about removing barriers to access to Hopkins and advancement in Hopkins. Our partnerships should look different. People should talk about our partnerships in a different way, right? Talk about our partnerships as mutually beneficial. Talk about our partnerships as strong in Baltimore with our neighbors, right? Talk about our partnerships in all of the local communities where Hopkins is housed, in DC after 555 Penn, that those partnerships will be stronger, right? Our pedagogy, how do we teach, right? How do students learn? How do we have these conversations in classrooms around D&I? Should be different. Our policies and platforms, our infrastructure should be different. And our participation, that folks, that more and more individuals, in addition to those who I've already talked about, who give a lot of their time to this effort, that more and more of you will find this as a worthwhile effort to be a part of. I've listed, and I'll keep this slide up for a little while, even though you all will have access to all the slides. I should have said that in the beginning. And also to remind you that you can ask questions. So there should be a place for you to ask questions. These are the goal leaders of the 24 goals that were placed in the roadmap. So when you are wondering, how can I get involved in roadmap goal 3 or roadmap goal 5 or roadmap goal 7? If you go to the roadmap page on this diversity.edu page, at jhu.edu page at Hopkins, and you see the roadmap tabs, you will see the 24 strategic goals that were listed in the roadmap. And for each of those goals, we have assigned a goal leader, an individual whose responsibility it is to move that particular goal forward. And they're using all of those components of that design thinking strategic planning process, which includes getting input from our community to move those goals forward. So anyone who wants to participate, I'm sure they would welcome your involvement in the development, implementation, and execution of those goals. Here are the 11 prioritized projects. Whenever you start a strategic planning process, you want to make sure that you have a set of goals that you want to pay particular attention to. And many of these goals were the goals that had infrastructure, meaning resources assigned to them. So there were goals that required a certain amount of pre-planning in order for us to include those goals in the roadmap, because our commitment was, if it's included in the roadmap, we've already decided how we're going to fund it. So of these 11 goals that we've set up, we've had a great deal of early success in these goals. So we've already developed the diversity statement that is now been added to our website. And we encourage more of you, as you're thinking about planning within your own individual units, to refer to that diversity statement. It talks about what are our shared values and the institutional commitment to D&I. Many of you know that the Vivian Thomas Scholars Initiative kicked off this fall with scholars who are, when you look at their resumes, and there's a link when you get the slide deck, you'll see there's a link to the announcement page. And I've met these scholars, and you look at the activities and the academic performance and the awards that they bring to Hopkins, you have to be proud of the connection that we're making with students who we know will change the world. And that these students allow us to continue to move the needle in important ways, particularly in STEM graduate education, which we know from all the research is one of those intractable places in D&I. And so the fact that Hopkins is leaning in partnerships with HBCUs and MSIs to have a mutually beneficial partnership, that we can learn as much from those institutions as the resources and supports that we can provide for programs like Vivian Thomas Scholars Initiative. I'm also pleased that the Fannie Gassinger Hanson Faculty of Excellence program has moved forward, naming this after a story and a faculty member with a great legacy was an important, I think, outcome of the conversations around this program. We've already received 9 proposals and we made 3 awards, and that we will announce those awards over the next couple of weeks. So you'll get to see the first set of institutional partners who get to hire cluster faculty, diverse faculty under the Fannie Gassinger Hanson program, previously known as the TOP program. The Non-STEM Pathways program, just to let you know that this was an important opportunity for us to think about non-STEM and the importance of making sure that we have clear pathways for our non-STEM disciplines as well. And so we made those awards, and just reading those proposals, I am excited about the opportunities that we're making available. And a lot of this work across all of these prioritized goals I will share is it's not just about the activity itself, because the activities, lots of institutions do similar activities. It's about building the capacity to continue to have the infrastructure in place to be creative, to be innovative, to say this particular strategy works. Let's figure out how we can have more of it, right, on our campus so that we can have more of an impact. I will talk a little bit about the climate study, which we're kicking off next week. And the staff advisory committee and the student governance committees are starting their planning process. And ODI infrastructure and staffing investments, you can see that we've increased the level of supports over the last 2 years for ODI. And for me, that just means that we have more folks who are centrally poised to help the great work that you are doing locally. The climate study, I wanted to just spend a little bit of time on the climate study, even though we're going to have a huge rollout and talk more about this. This will be an important effort for our campus to have conversations about the now, so baseline for where our climate is, so that we can better understand what is the climate we would like to see over the next 3 to 5 years as a result of the roadmap. Without campus involvement, and I mean the involvement of everyone within the listening of this webinar or this meeting or this presentation, and all across Hopkins, we need individuals to be invested in this climate study process. So we know for you to tell us, all right, where we are as an institution, and ultimately for us to determine where we want to go as an institution. The roadmap implementation process is underway. I've already talked about the goal leaders. I've talked about some of the success of the prioritized goals of the 24. There is a central process, and that was the 24 roadmap goals. But there's also a divisional process that is underway, where the academic and operation divisions have developed 1 to 2 goals to advance DE&I in their area. And these are just the 1 to 2 goals that they are lifting up for the institution to take note of. Many of our academic divisions have full-fledged roadmap plans of their own that I would encourage you to try to find on their websites or to connect with those D&I deans and directors. The 1 to 2 goals that the divisional academics and operational divisions have developed, we will actually place those on the roadmap website over the next couple of weeks, because our hope is to track those goals along with the roadmap goals. We will develop accountability metrics, and at key moments of the year, mid-year and at the end of the year, we will share with you the outcomes of those academic and operational goals, as well as those 24 central goals. What's important about this is they're often local solutions that make better sense to implement and move forward than there are central responses or central resources or interventions that need to move forward. Many of those of you who are in academic and operational divisions, you know the issues that you face around D&I. You know the work that needs to be done. And so allowing the academic and operational divisions or empowering them to galvanize around those issues and move those goals forward is the best way for us to have institutional success because of our decentralized nature. So thinking about this process as everyone's responsibility, this is the way we manifest it through the roadmap process. As I shared, we'll be tracking the roadmap and divisional goals on our website so that you can see where are we? Are there goals that we committed to that we've made no, little, or we've made all of the progress necessary to move that goal forward? We are currently thinking about this phased in process, and we are actually in phase 3. So we're at the execution, building, and starting to think about the assessment stage. So building the accountability for the roadmap, thinking about what our assessment will look like is how we're building out that website of sharing with you the goals and what that tracking mechanism will look like, what those biannual progress reports will look like, and what the annual roadmap showcase might look like. We're also rethinking other key components like what are the composition reports going to look like? Are there additional aspects of diversity we include, or are there different elements of D&I? Right now, we focus primarily on composition, but we're thinking about including equity metrics and inclusion metrics after we conducted our climate study. Here is the 1-year timeline. So it doesn't feel like in 2020 that it will be ever possible for me to post a 1-year timeline, but I'm so excited that we can start talking about what this first year of roadmap will look like. Getting to that annual summit and publicly sharing our progress, and I know having a celebration and to have a thoughtful reflection on the places where we could lean in more. I'm so looking forward to it. I'll talk just a little bit about our accountability scorecard that we want to develop as an institution. You can have all the resources that you want. You can have the infrastructure, you can have the people, you can have the volunteers, you can have goals, you can have a plan. But if there is no clear accountability set forth at the beginning of the process, you're likely not to have the type of success that you need to have. We've had accountability as a part of Roadmap 1. The fact that we had our composition reports online, we were transparent about where we were, that was a part of our accountability metrics or matrix. Moving forward, as we think about our accountability, we're going to develop scorecards. And this is just a sample scorecard. This is not the card that we will ultimately end up with. But if you think about all of the goals that we put forward, we will ask each of our individual units, we'll ask the university, and we'll ask the department or division level, where would you like to see, or where do you think you will be in a year's time? And based on where that unit says it will be in a year's time, then if they have made that progress, their score will reflect the progress that they've made along that continuum in terms of the metric, the goal that they set for themselves. Institutional accountability is additionally a key feature, not just using that scorecard. I've talked about the survey, broadening the composition reports, but also tracking our current and future investment in D&I. We need to better understand where we are in terms of the investment of resources and time, and if we need to make shifts to make sure we're better poised to moving the work forward. Also, which elevated in this institutional accountability was ensuring attentiveness to disability. We recognized in the last roadmap process, as we stated, that there were several goals or several populations or groups of folks that weren't necessarily accounted for in Roadmap 1. And the leadership felt that it was extremely important that we raise the issue of thinking about disability inclusion, thinking about advocacy and accessibility should be part of our institutional accountability matrix. Some of the ways that we're thinking about these are staffing. We're thinking about these in terms of additional resources, right? But more importantly, tracking, right, our efforts in this area. We have some upcoming activities, and this is actually my last slide. And the upcoming activities, I've talked about the climate study, so I won't spend much more time on there other than to say, I hope that you invest the time necessary to tell the institution through the climate study instrument where you think we are in terms of our climate at Hopkins. We have a few new positions in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that we would love to have your support in sharing with individuals who you know have this skill set. We also are thinking about, I talked about capacity building. So thinking about DE&I credentialing. We are currently engaged in an education audit where we're trying to see what are the current resources and where there are gaps so that we can expand offerings and anticipate a pilot program in 2021. And finally, ODI's identity. I'm open to renaming ODI. I haven't shared that with leadership yet, but I'm going to share it with this group. I'm open to renaming ODI. We are thinking about our future mission, our vision, and our values. We've started that conversation internally, but we believe that ODI's function as a central office is to support the work that's happening institutionally. And because of that, and in thinking about this inside out theme, it's going to be important for you all to contribute to what will ODI look like in the future. What does ODI mean? What is its mission? What should be its future vision? And then what are the values that ODI should stand on? So look forward to opportunities to engage us in a conversation about our name, but more importantly, about our identity. So on that, that's my last slide. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. All right, so I have one question, and I can take down the presentation. See, stop share. There you go. So question, what is the best way for folks to get involved with DEI efforts at Johns Hopkins? Are there divisional and or central opportunities for people to contribute? Absolutely. As I shared in the one slide, there are D&I deans in every academic division, and actually in many of our operational divisions, they developed either D&I groups, they have developed councils and committees that work on these issues. So I would contact the dean's office to find out who is your representative if you're in an academic division, and then operationally, I would just ask your operation leadership who's moving your D&I efforts forward. It's a great question. Other questions? Question, as we move through the roadmap process, how will we address new issues that arise? That's an excellent question. And it's one that as the ODI office, we spend a lot of time thinking about. We are the stewards, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we're the stewards of the roadmap, but we're also responsible for D&I writ large on campus. And so just because it is not in the roadmap does not mean it's an initiative or a goal that we still need to move forward. So we are always tracking. We're always working on issues. No one strategic plan should ever be the full complement of all the work that they do in any particular area. It is only those goals that we know need shared across large institutions like ours, a shared commitment in order for us to move them forward. But there are things that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, along with those D&I deans and our partners in JHMI, that we still work on behind the scenes. And we would encourage you all to contact us. If there are issues that you feel like the institution needs to address in a strategic or tactical way that you don't see addressed, we are happy to take those calls, take those emails at odi.jhu.edu, I think is our email address. But it's an opportunity for you to just share with us. These are things that I'm seeing, or these are the experiences that I'm having. And is there anyone on campus who are addressing these issues? There's likely that there's someone who's already looking at that particular issue and trying to move it forward, but it could just be likely that it's not something that's been brought to our attention that we're happy to move forward. So ODI will actually have its own strategic plan that will sit alongside the diversity, the roadmap. And we also know that as a part of the 10 by 20 conversations that the president is having, that there will be diversity elements as a part of that particular strategic plan as well. We need that holistic and intentional approach across a variety of different infrastructures and a different processes in order for us really to be effective in this space. So question. Thank you. This was helpful to hear and learn more. Can I talk a bit about the commitment of the leadership for D&I? Are they engaged in any D&I learning? Absolutely. So we have developed as a part of the work that is happening from our executive director on education and professional development. We're developing not only a what's the program called? We're developing toolkits for our leaderships to use, but also manager training that we've worked with HR. So HR has been the lead in developing a manager's training, and our office has supported that as a first step in us developing what I would think which is an intentional and comprehensive training for our leadership. So that one training will be a single element in what we see as a comprehensive approach to training. So each year we will develop training goals and we will share those with leadership. Sometimes that will mean bringing in outside elements to train us on particular issues. Sometimes that means developing an internal training resources. Also, what's happening I don't know how much to give, but as part of the roadmap, I'll say, there is a comprehensive leadership training program that is being developed out of the Office of Faculty Affairs to look at leadership training writ large, all academic units and operational units. And they're pulling together now a proposal to roll out for what that comprehensive training will look like. And it is very robust and rigorous, and it incorporates compulsory training with volunteer training. So there's those different elements. Okay, lots of questions. What do you think are the biggest barriers we face right now advancing D&I at JHU? I think the fact that we're so decentralized that sometimes the impact of the work that's being done gets lost in translation. And so that's why having conversations about what a framework looks like and how we can make sure we're being attentive to connections and looking at gaps, I think is one of those efforts. I also think that there was a lot of energy in 2020 around what happened in the world. And there were a lot more people whose eyes were on D&I, who were wanting to have conversations and partnerships and wanted to be involved in this effort. And some of that we see has waned over time. I also think that people are tired. There's a lot that's happened. The pandemic, what's happened in the world, what's happening in the world every day we turn on our news. And so I think that there are a lot of folks who are exhausted and in this effort. And so I think trying to make sure that we can help energize and support those who move this effort forward. I also think that there are trust issues. I think that when you're doing this work, there has to be trust that the institution means what it says and that their values are represented in all of the decisions that they make. And so I do think at Hopkins, we have to work on trust and trying to make sure that we address issues that impact or bring mistrust to the leadership. Thank you. Let's see. The president focused on the internal. What part of the D&I vision for outside the institution into the communities, city, and beyond? Yeah, absolutely. I've shared with a number of folks that before I came to Hopkins, I worked in a division of diversity and community engagement. That was my division at the University of Mississippi. And that was extremely important for me. It was important for me because I see those things as uniquely tied, linked together. I think, I know the president and others often say that where goes Baltimore goes Hopkins. Hopkins has, in every institution, in my opinion, a higher education institution, has a responsibility to serve the community. And when I say serve the community, that doesn't mean that we decide what the community's needs are. It means that we ask the community what their needs are, and we make sure that whatever the resources, whether it's our research enterprise or our social enterprise or our financial economic enterprise, meets and serves those needs. I have this strategy called sort of the blank sheet in terms of community engagement. So when I go into communities, I don't want to already have a proposal. I want us to have a blank sheet, a blank board. We're starting at the beginning. What are your needs? What are our needs? How can we make sure that this activity is mutually beneficial for everyone? And where is it important for Hopkins to take the lead? And where is it important for Hopkins to take the backseat? That is built into the roadmap in terms of the infrastructure. But as we're working with offices like the Office on Economic Development, I think community engagement may be a part of that title, but I may get that wrong. As we continue to work to build those partnerships, having partnerships also with government and community relations office, we're always talking, in JHMI, working with Dr. Shrita Golden, we're always talking about what is our commitment to Baltimore and the community around us, and how might we expand our reach to make sure that we're accounting for that commitment. I think having the conversation yesterday as a part of the plenary, and if you haven't seen the plenary, go look at the recording. But having that as a part of the plenary conversation was important. It was important last year to have the mayor and have the councilwoman here last year too, because it is extremely important that we always have that top of mind, that we are in Baltimore, and therefore it's important that we serve Baltimore in the work that we do. Next question, we might not be, here we go. Is JHU going to make salary information publicly available? That's a great question. That is definitely one that we can raise with our HR folks. I know that it's what's clear in the roadmap is pay equity. So we are working on a pay equity study. But that's a great question about if we make that information publicly available. And briefly, I talked about disability. Can you share more about how this role will help support faculty and staff who aren't supported in their schools? We have been approved to bring in a single position, and I suspect that we need to bring in more supports for that position to help us actually think through that question, to go out and look at peers who have been successful in supporting faculty in this space. What have those peers done? What kind of infrastructure have they put forward? What kind of programming and interventions have they put in place? And how can we replicate them in the context of Hopkins? So we are currently in the process of putting together a search committee and developing a job description for that one individual to help us do that thought work so that we can determine what that infrastructure needs to look like. And I imagine that it's going to be larger than a single person. I'm trying to get through inclusion of spirituality is considered by many to be the next frontier. Where does this fall into the Hopkins organization D&I structure? Well, I'll say I take a holistic approach to thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion. But I do think that there are always ways that we can be more expansive in how we demonstrate our commitment to do that, whether that's in our training, whether that's in what we put on our websites, whether that's in the education, whether that's in even what our staff name, what our department names are, or what information that we put out there about the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to start more talking about what D&I means to us. What are these elements of identity, cultural identity, spirituality, and others, and how we position ourselves to be not only convening thought leaders, but also to work strategically to help support individuals who want to have either expression or development or conversations or engagement around different parts of their identity that they don't currently see happening. So we would love to have those conversations. We currently have our chaplain is always willing to have those conversations, but our team is also in ODI thinking about all of the dimensions of diversity and how we're trying to represent that in the work that we do. Is there a role for non-tenure track faculty? Absolutely. I've been a non-tenure track faculty member, whatever you call them, professional faculty member at other institutions, they've been called that, adjunct faculty member my whole career. And so I know how important our non-tenure track faculty are, but I have also worked with non-tenure faculty groups that have advocated for support at institutions, understand the demands and the challenges and the, but I have found that many of them who are in the classrooms with our first year students and who are very involved in community, and many of them are from the communities that we serve, that they can really contribute to us understanding this institution. And it's important for us to think about equity for them, opportunity for them, and inclusion for them. I know I'm not going to be able to get through all of the questions. I see, are there training opportunities available for individuals who want to become the department's D&I champion? I would encourage you to talk to your D&I dean or director, because there are many of them who have developed supports for D&I champions. And for managers, is there a hiring practice toolkit that ODI has? We are actually working on a toolkit. We are, we are a organization or a department, sorry, for the last 2 years that we've been building. And so there are many parts of our toolkits that are actually ready to go, but we're working on our website. So we hope that before the end of the academic year, we're able to update our website and roll out those toolkits. But if you contact us, like I said, at our ODI email address, we have an executive director of education and professional development, inclusive excellence, education and professional development, who already has the outline for our hiring practices toolkit that they are willing to share with you. But our plan is to roll out all of that information before the end of the semester. I think that's the last question I have. I will just say in closing, I have 2 minutes, I think, left in closing, and unless I have any burning questions. I came to Hopkins, and I think I've told this story in more environments when I first arrived, but I came to Hopkins because I was sitting in a room with a number of my colleagues about 4 years ago. And I realized I've been in this work for almost 30 years. I'll be 2 years shy of 30 years this year. And I was sitting in a room and we were having the same conversation. I felt like it was deja vu, hyper deja vu. Like I felt like we weren't talking about new ways to envision doing this work. We were all just trying to fix the sort of broken infrastructures that we had inherited. And the opportunity to come and talk and to see what you all had done in Hopkins was an attractive opportunity. And I think Hopkins can be a leader in this space. I am convinced we can. What you all have done just by the voluntary effort of the folks who are here, adding a little infrastructure can only make things stronger. So more questions have come in. How does the roadmap address those of us who work in the dining halls and in janitor areas? We don't seem to be included in this in any specific way at all. I definitely appreciate that comment. And I will agree with you. On its face, that is not included or elevated. There are ways that we talk in this roadmap in very high 30,000 foot ways that don't necessarily reflect the individual experience. I think as we move forward, rolling out aspects of the roadmap, I want us to go to a different level where we are making it clear that we are thinking of the variety of experiences of our staff, those in the dining halls, in particular, those who are in those roles. There are places where we talk about pay equity, and there's places that we talk about building affinity groups, where we talk about building even employee resource groups, which I think would be a good way for us to make sure that your voices are elevated in a strategic way. We also talk about career architecture. So it's hidden. The individual experience is not as explicit in there. But I would welcome you to reach out to us and give us advice on different ways that we can make it more transparent and apparent that we do care and we do believe it's our responsibility to move those efforts forward. Does JHU have an affirmative action plan? Yes, we do. Is there a JHU OID policy that is university-wide? I'm not sure what that second part means other than the EOC policy that we have in place. But yes, JHU does participate, does have an affirmative action report and a plan. And that information we use to help us in our planning process, particularly around our the areas that have low utilization and need. Okay, other questions? Okay, so I think I'm going to transition and unless there's burning questions that come through, it's very hard. I really wished we all did coming into this year. We thought we were going to be able to have this in person. And so I would be able to meet many of you that I've met online and in Zoom. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. I do know that that is the unique value also, additional value of this DLC conference, that you all get to connect and network around this important issue. And so I hope next year or, hopefully maybe over the summer, we'll do something offline where we can all come together. But the DLC conference is an important treasure. The DLC group is an important asset of the institution. And the fact that I have the pleasure of working with them is an important part of the work that I'm able to do. I want to thank my team. I want to start transitioning off. Thank the ODI team for all the work that you do in this effort. Thank the leadership for the work that they do. Thank you for all the presenters as a part of the conference. Thank you for those of you who are backdoor with us today, helping us, Hero, Kelly, and I think Mary is our captioner today. Just thank you for all the effort that you put into making these 2 days work and making this a great experience for everyone. Enjoy the rest of this day. Know that the work of diversity, equity, inclusion is beyond the roadmap. It is with you. What you do individually and what you do in the space that you're in makes a huge difference. We just want to be in partnership with you. So bring us in, contact us, challenge us, critique us, call us out as you have. We can take it. It's the world, it's the work that we do. And someone said, happy homecoming. I know someone in the background from my alma mater, my homecoming was this weekend, but I chose to be here with you all. So thank you, Spelman sister. Happy homecoming to you too. All right, everyone. On that note, thank you so much and have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of the DLC conference.